Hey guys, Mako here, and today I would like to talk about something slightly different. And that thing is something that just came up in a random conversation I had that actually had nothing to do with the topic of today's video, but I kind of just went off talking about it for about like 5 minutes, and you can probably tell by the title of this video what said thing is. Now, before I start this video, well, first of all, you can hear that I fixed my microphone. That's quite a long story what actually happened and why it sounded like I was recording from a bathroom, but that doesn't really matter. But also, you might notice that this video has a little bit less of a structure when I'm talking, and that's because I decided to just talk about it right out the bat, live without any script. So sometimes my thoughts might be kind of all over the place. Well, we'll see how you people like it. So here it is. Oh, and before we start, if you liked the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe. I read every comment I get. I appreciate any feedback I get. So yeah, let's get back to what I was talking about. And it's maybe not a fact, but I just think that we don't need more huge AAA games. Now, some AAA games are obviously fine, and I'm not going to say, oh, we just don't need AAA games at all. But hear me out. If over the past 10 years you've played a bunch of AAA titles, have you ever noticed that they seem like they lack vision and direction, like they are just bland? Made for the biggest audience possible, made safely? Well, I think there's a couple reasons for that. Reason one would be the fact that the marketing people are now in charge of video game companies and not people that actually build these games, that are gamers by heart. But also, it's because these companies try to create the next big thing every single time. And what happens when you try to create the next big thing? Well, exactly what I just mentioned. You create a bland product, something that will appeal to everybody. But when you create something that tries to appeal to everyone, it appeals to no one. And then on top of that, if you create a game that tries to appeal to everyone, it's going to take a lot of time to create that game. And if you take a lot of time to create a game, it is very likely that this game will come out straight out the gate outdated. And another thing that affects the speed at which the games are released is just the size of the studio in general. And I'm not talking specifically about how many people are employed in the studio, I'm talking about the amount of people that work on the same game. Why do you need 1,000 people to create a new AAA title? You don't. At this point, it's just bloat that will cause more decision paralysis or just bad choices. At the management side, and speaking of the management, they also need to be people that actively play games, that are gamers and not some corporate people that studied marketing at Harvard, let's say, or different university, and now they know how to appeal to a broad audience. You don't need that. What we need is just more smaller games made by smaller teams of people, and keep in mind, I'm not saying smaller studios, I'm talking smaller teams of people that don't take like 5 years, 10 years to create, because by the time you start creating a game now that's going to be a AAA title, it's going to finish in like 2030 and it's going to come out outdated. Like nobody's going to want to play this game, or even if they will try to play this game, the industry has moved on by now. And what happens when that big title that you've pumped a lot of money into and a lot of time into doesn't sell? Well, then the studio gets shut down because they just created a title that didn't even make up for the costs that the company sunk into the game, and now they cannot afford to create another one. So the studio's shut down. And that doesn't need to be the reality. My, let's say, proposal would be to stop focusing on giant titles that try to be the next big thing and create some smaller ones. Create smaller teams, just let's say up to 40 people, obviously that's just an example, but just a smaller team, smaller agile team that's not managed by a marketing person but somebody with a vision. Let them cook. Why can't we have smaller games from big studios that don't take 5 years to create, or 10 years, or even 15 at some point? Why can't we just have some games that can be created in, let's say, 2-3 years, that don't necessarily need to scream AAA but AA? I think that's a better solution now for the companies. Instead of pumping resources into these $70, $80 or $90 games, just create AA titles, smaller games from passionate people that can make smaller profits, yes, but also take way less resources. Therefore, there is less of a chance for failure. Now, obviously that was from the business side, but let's talk about this from a different angle, not only from the business side of view, but from the player's side of view. I am an adult and I don't have that much time at my hand. I don't have time to grind out WoW for 20, 40 hours a week. I'm not a kid anymore. And that means I also don't have time to play through, let's say, 3 or 4 huge AAA titles that take you 100, 200 hours to complete every year. Now, you might think to yourself, well, just don't buy that many AAA titles. Yeah, sure. But what if we just got smaller titles? Something that can be played through in 8 hours, didn't cost you $90 for this 8 hours of pure cinema, let's say, and you can just put it down. Maybe play through it one more time, but then you can just move on to the next game. Because one of the things that I find important is, well, the ability to complete the game. And I don't mean that the game should be easy, because obviously there is a market for easy games. What I mean by that is the fact that many a time I buy a game, I play it, but it's so big and there's so many random things to do that I never actually complete it, because by the time I get to the end game, I get bored and I move on to another game. Meaning, I feel like I just didn't get my full money's worth from that game. Obviously, getting your money's worth from the game is a subjective thing. Some people just count it by the hour per dollar or something else. Like whether they had fun with the game or if they completed it. Now, I myself can put myself into somewhere in between these two categories. Sometimes I don't mind that I didn't finish the game if I had lots of fun playing it, but sometimes that kind of matters to me. I feel like I didn't actually get my money's worth if I didn't finish a game, especially if it was, let's say, a narrative-driven game. And that's kind of the developer's fault, because they just create these elongated experiences, these stretched out games that don't need to be stretched out. And that's where my idea comes in. My idea that we need smaller games. They don't need to be that big. You can legitimately buy a, let's say, $40, maybe $50 game that takes you, let's say, 8, 10, up to 20 hours to complete it. Maybe not 100% it, but complete it, and then, let's say, 100% it in 30 hours. And then you're done. But it was absolute cinema. The greatest experience you've had. I would much rather have a game that I've spent that $50 on, but the experience I had with the game was so condensed that I don't regret that it was only that 20 to 30 hours. I'm happy that it was that short and it didn't waste my time. It just put me straight in the action and didn't stop delivering until the end of the game. Obviously, this is an ideal scenario, meaning that the game was an absolute banger, but then when you look on the other side of the coin. If the game is pretty bad, then you at least didn't waste your time with it, and it doesn't feel as if you just burnt a stack of cash to play a very shitty game to, I'm gonna be brutal, to eat shit. And additionally, these smaller titles let you have some creative freedom. They don't need to be the same big franchise. It doesn't need to be another Call of Duty. These smaller games don't need to be Assassin's Creed. It can be something completely new. And if you start creating new games, if you start being creative, well, then maybe you finally found your next big franchise. Why? Because you experimented. Because you took a risk. Obviously, there are games that are creative, new, small, created by a smaller team of people, but most of the time these are indie games. And I'm not going to throw shade at indie games because, my god, there are some good indie games like Game of the Year Balatro, but we also need to fill that gap between indie and AAA. We need something that can be created by a decent studio, by a decent team of people that is well funded, that have an idea, and then they realize that idea. I mean, how do you think Devil May Cry was created? It was a failed project. Devil May Cry was originally supposed to be Resident Evil, but it didn't feel like Resident Evil, so they rebranded the game and created a new thing on a smaller budget. Same with Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed was supposed to be a new Prince of Persia, and instead it was so different that they just made a completely new game out of it. Nowadays, if something like that would have happened, we would have not gotten a new game, a new, let's say, franchise. We would have just gotten the game they were planning to make that doesn't feel like the game that people were waiting for. And that's still bad, because they probably spent so much money trying to develop that game, and yet it didn't turn out well, because it wasn't the thing that people were expecting it to be. So anyway, to sum up what I was talking about, we don't need that many huge AAA games that take so long. We don't need every single game to be attempting to become the next big thing. What I think we need is smaller games that can be created by smaller studios, something that doesn't need to take up so much of your life that you can't really do anything else if you want to play said game. Something that has a vision and that focuses on 1, 2, maybe 3 things that are good about the game, and they just go with it instead of trying to appeal to as many people as possible. We need games that aim for a specific group of people and that want to be played by a specific group of people and not by everyone. That can be dished out faster and cheaper by game companies, meaning we have more diversity in what we play. We need to fill the gap between AAA and indie. And yeah, that's just something that I talked about with somebody IRL, and it came out of a completely different conversation. And then I thought I would like to just talk about it on my channel, and well, here it is.